The first time his hand brushed against mine, I told myself it was nothing. A fleeting mistake. A moment swallowed by the noise of conversation and the closeness of shadows. But when his touch lingered, when the silence between us grew louder than the words we spoke, I realized I had stepped into a place where boundaries blur and innocence falters. This wasn't just small talk anymore. It was the unraveling of loyalty, the dangerous weight of temptation pressing against the fragile walls of what I once believed was unshakable. I thought we were just talking. Then his hands went too far, and nothing in my life remained untouched after that night. If you've ever found yourself lost in a story like this, pulled into the gravity of secrets and consequences, stay with me. And if you're new here, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who understands how quickly trust can slip away when temptation whispers too close. It helps us keep telling stories like this one, stories that remind us how thin the line is between choice and regret. It started with nothing more than words, casual and forgettable. The kind of conversations that spill between colleagues when the hours stretch too long and the walls of the office feel too tight. His voice always seemed softer when he spoke to me, not in tone but in intention, as if he had carved out a secret space within the noise where only I existed. I told myself it was harmless. People talked. People laughed. It was nothing more than that. But somewhere in the subtle tilt of his head, in the way his eyes lingered just a little longer than politeness allowed, there was a heaviness pressing down, an unspoken acknowledgement of something neither of us dared to name. The silence between those words began to carry its own weight. I would hear it after the laughter faded, after the stories ended. It followed me into the quiet moments at home, lingering even as I sat across the dinner table from the man who had trusted me with his life, his heart, his future. My husband asked me about my day, and I answered with a practiced smile, never mentioning the pull I felt when someone else's gaze burned too close. It wasn't love. It wasn't even desire, not at first. It was attention. It was the dangerous comfort of being seen too clearly by someone who had no right to look at me that way. He would stop by my desk with reasons too flimsy to be real. Papers that could have been emailed. Questions that had answers already written in manuals. His presence was the excuse, not the task. And though I told myself I didn't care, that I was immune, I felt the tension coil inside me, a silent string tightening every time he leaned closer. The way he spoke lowered just enough to feel like a secret, as though each sentence was meant only for me. And still I said nothing. I let it happen. It's strange how silence can speak louder than confessions. How not saying no can echo louder than any words of resistance. I thought silence was safety, that if I didn't acknowledge what was happening, if I stayed quiet, it could not become real. Yet silence does not erase temptation. It feeds it. It allows it to grow unchecked, curling around every glance, every pause, every stolen second like vines creeping through cracks in stone. At night, I would lie awake next to my husband, listening to his steady breathing, the rhythm of a man who trusted the woman beside him without doubt. Guilt sat on my chest like an unmovable weight. I hadn't done anything wrong, not really. But my heart knew the truth. Betrayal doesn't always begin with lips pressed together in the dark. Sometimes it begins with words whispered too close, with laughter that lasts too long, with the touch of a hand that lingers a second more than it should. The first time his fingers brushed mine, it was an accident. Or at least that's what I told myself. The stack of papers slipped between us, hands reaching at the same time, skin grazing skin. But the moment stretched, the brush lingered, and though I pulled back quickly, something inside me stirred. A warning, sharp and undeniable, yet tangled with something that felt like fire. I swallowed hard, pretending it hadn't happened. Pretending I hadn't noticed the way his eyes flicked to mine, as though testing the boundaries of silence itself. Every small encounter became heavier after that. The distance between us seemed to shrink, though the world around us stayed the same. In meetings, I could feel the heat of his stare even when I didn't meet his eyes. In crowded hallways, the space we left between us was smaller than it should have been. And all the while, I told myself it was nothing. Just silence. Just coincidence. just shadows where nothing lived, but silence is not empty. It hums with the things unsaid, with the weight of everything denied. I began to notice the way my pulse quickened when I saw him coming. The way my stomach twisted when I caught myself wondering what it would feel like if his hand lingered again. Not by accident, but on purpose. I hated myself for thinking it. I hated myself for wanting something forbidden. And yet the silence kept growing louder. I tried to push it down, to bury it beneath the routines of marriage and home. I cooked dinner. I folded laundry. I laughed at my husband's jokes. And still, in the back of my mind, there was a whisper I couldn't silence, a whisper that belonged to a man whose name was not my husband's. I began to dread the moments when we would be alone in the office, not because I feared him, but because I feared myself. I feared what silence had already begun to build inside me. There are moments in life when you know, without speaking it aloud, that you are standing at the edge of something dangerous. You see the drop ahead, you feel the pull of gravity, and though you know you should step back, part of you leans forward. That was where I stood in those days, balanced on the fragile line between loyalty and temptation, between silence and confession. And each day that line grew thinner. I thought I could control it, that if I stayed quiet, if I told no one, if I never admitted what was happening even to myself, it would fade. But silence doesn't make fire burn less. It smothers the flames until they find a crack, and when they do, the blaze is unstoppable. I didn't know it then, but I had already lit the match, and so I carried the weight of silence with me, heavy and suffocating, believing I could hold it forever. I didn't yet know how quickly silence could turn into something else, how quickly words could become touches, and touches could become something far more dangerous. I thought we were just talking. I thought silence could protect me. I was wrong. The second time his hand found mine, it was no accident. There was no stack of papers to excuse it, no clumsy timing to hide behind. It was deliberate, quiet, and terrifying in its certainty. We were standing too close, both of us reaching for the same folder, when his fingers slipped against mine and didn't move away. For a moment, the world narrowed into that single touch. The room, the air, the noise, all of it vanished beneath the pressure of his skin against mine. I should have pulled back. I should have laughed it off, broken the silence, reclaimed the air that suddenly felt too heavy to breathe. But instead I froze. The tremor in his hand betrayed him, but he didn't let go. He held the contact a second longer than he should have, long enough for me to understand that this wasn't an accident. This was intent, and my silence, once again, gave him permission. The danger of small things is how easily they disguise themselves as harmless. A hand that lingers, a breath that falls too close. These gestures hide beneath excuses, but they carry weight far greater than their size. That night, when I lay beside my husband, I replayed the moment over and over, feeling the phantom warmth of his fingers long after they were gone. My chest ached with guilt, but the ache was tangled with something else, something darker, something I refused to name. The next day, he acted as though nothing had happened. He walked past me in the hallway with the same casual stride, spoke with the same measured tone, and yet I could feel it. An invisible thread stretched taut between us, humming with tension that only we seemed to notice. Every word we exchanged was layered, every glance heavy with what had already been done and what threatened to come next. In the stillness of those moments, I began to realize that touch has a language of its own. His hands said what his mouth never dared. They trembled, yes, but they spoke of hunger, of boundaries tested, of doors pushed open one careful inch at a time. And though I never answered with words, my silence spoke back. It told him I wasn't running. It told him I was listening. The line between accident and intention blurred with frightening speed. He found reasons to stand closer, excuses to brush past me in narrow spaces, moments where his hand would rest briefly on my shoulder, my back, my arm. Always fleeting, always deniable, yet always deliberate. Each touch carried a spark, small enough to ignore, powerful enough to ignite something deep inside me. I tried to bury the fire beneath ordinary days. I cooked, I worked, I kissed my husband goodnight with lips that trembled from secrets unspoken. But each time I thought of those touches, my chest filled with both shame and a desperate, quiet yearning. It horrified me to admit it, even to myself, but the truth grew too heavy to deny. Part of me wanted it. And that wanting became its own betrayal. I didn't need to sleep with him to know I was already guilty. Every time his hand brushed against mine, every time his fingers lingered, I chose silence instead of refusal. That silence was its own confession. One afternoon, when the office was nearly empty, he leaned too close. His arm brushed against mine. His breath grazed my ear, and though he said something ordinary, something about deadlines and meetings, I barely heard it. All I could feel was the way his presence filled the space around me, the way his hand hovered, trembling, as though fighting the urge to fall against my skin again. I remember staring at the desk, at the papers scattered there, trying to pretend I couldn't feel the storm brewing inches away. When it happened again, his hand settling against mine, holding longer, pressing slightly as though to claim something unspoken, I didn't move away. I let the silence stretch, heavy and consuming, until he finally pulled back. And in that moment, when his hand left mine, it wasn't relief I felt. It was loss. That realization broke me. How had I come to this place, where the absence of his touch felt like emptiness, where the presence of his hand made my heart race in ways I hadn't felt in years? I thought of my husband, of the promises we had built our lives on, and I felt sick. But guilt alone wasn't enough to stop the trembling inside me, the pull towards something that could destroy everything I had. It's easy to believe betrayal happens all at once, with a single, irreversible choice. But the truth is softer, more insidious. It happens slowly, with every second of silence, every lingering hand, every unspoken word. It grows in the spaces where no one is watching, fed by moments that seem too small to matter until they've already changed everything. That night, when I lay awake in the dark, I pressed my hands together as if I could erase his touch from my skin. But memory has its own way of clinging, and the ghost of him refused to fade. His hands had trembled, yes, but they had also claimed something of me I could not take back. I knew then that I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, that his hands, trembling though they were, had already gone too far. And still, part of me leaned closer to the fire, unable or unwilling to step away. Secrets do not live quietly. They take root in the chest, pressing against the heart until every breath feels heavier than the last. After his hands lingered too long, after silence became complicity, I began to carry the weight of secrecy with me everywhere. It clung to my skin like a scent, something I imagined everyone around me could smell, even though no one said a word. At home, my husband smiled at me the same way he always had, trusting and unguarded. He asked about my day as if it were nothing more than work and errands, and I answered with words that tasted like lies even when they weren't. The truth wasn't in what I said, but in what I withheld. Every unspoken detail became another brick in the wall I was building between us. I could see it forming each time I sat across from him at dinner, each time I kissed his forehead before bed. The distance grew silently, unnoticed by him, but impossible for me to ignore. Guilt has a strange way of reshaping the world. It made every touch of my husband's hand feel like a question I couldn't answer, every kiss like a reminder of what I hadn't confessed. I wondered if he could feel it, the hesitation in my embrace, the way my laughter sometimes faltered. Did he sense the ghost of another man's touch clinging to me? Or was his trust so absolute that he never thought to look for cracks? The man at the center of my silence. He lived differently with the secret. Where I carried it like a wound, he seemed to wear it like a badge. His eyes searched for me in crowded rooms, his voice lowered when he spoke to me, and though he never dared to say what we both knew, the weight of his presence made everything heavier. Each time our paths crossed, the secret between us grew stronger, more undeniable. It was no longer just a moment of weakness. It was a living thing, breathing between us, demanding attention. There were days when I hated him for it. Hated the way he could look at me as if the world itself had narrowed into something dangerous and thrilling, while I sat at home drowning in guilt. Yet even in that hatred, there was a hunger I couldn't kill. It was the cruelty of secrecy. It made me long for the very thing that destroyed my peace. The burden seeped into places I hadn't expected. I caught myself hesitating when friends asked innocent questions. I avoided eye contact during conversations, afraid someone might see too much in my face. The secret sat inside me like a stone, dragging down every word, every gesture. Even laughter felt heavier, forced, like I was performing the part of myself that used to be real. At night, when the world was quiet, the whispers grew louder. My husband's hand would rest against mine in sleep, steady and familiar, and I would stare at the ceiling, suffocating beneath the knowledge of what I had allowed to begin. I told myself I could stop it, that if I pulled away, if I drew a line, the secret could die before it consumed me. But every time I thought of his trembling hands, of the way his gaze seemed to ignite something inside me, I knew it wasn't that simple. The secret was no longer just a burden. It was a temptation that lived in me, an ache I carried even when I wished it gone. The cruelest part was the double life it forced me into. By day, I was the devoted wife, the woman who smiled in photographs, who played her role without flaw. By night, in the quiet of my mind, I was someone else entirely, someone who replayed touches and glances, who wondered what might happen if silence finally broke. It was exhausting, wearing both skins, pretending I wasn't being eaten alive from the inside out. I began to notice the smallest details more vividly, as though my guilt sharpened my senses. The way my husband hummed softly when he read, the way the other man's sleeve brushed mine when we walked side by side, the sound of footsteps in the hall that made me panic, fearing someone had seen too much. Every detail mattered now, because every detail could betray me. The burden of secrecy is not just what you hide from others. It's what you hide from yourself. I told myself I hadn't crossed a line, not really. That I was still faithful, that nothing unforgivable had happened. But the truth is, betrayal begins long before lips meet. It begins in silence. It begins in the longing you try to ignore. It begins in the way you keep a secret so heavy that it bends you into someone unrecognizable. There were moments when I almost confessed. Words would form in my throat, desperate to escape, to end the weight I carried. But then I would look at my husband, at the softness in his eyes, and the words would shatter. How could I destroy him with something that hadn't even fully happened? How could I let my silence wound him when he had done nothing but love me? So I swallowed it all, night after night, until the secret became part of me. I thought I could live with it. I thought I could carry it quietly, that time would dull its edges, that I could starve the temptation until it died. But secrets don't starve. They grow, they spread. And mine was already beginning to fracture the walls I had built, leaking into places I swore it would never reach. What I didn't realize then was that secrets are never truly silent. They whisper. They leave traces. And eventually they demand to be seen. It is one thing to keep a secret in the shadows of your own heart. It is another when the shadows begin to spill into the light. For weeks I had convinced myself that no one could see it, that the silence between us was invisible to the world. But secrets are rarely contained. They slip into the way you hold yourself, into the way your eyes dart away too quickly, into the subtle changes no one should notice but somehow always do. The first crack came small. My husband asked me one evening why I seemed distracted, why my laughter had grown thin, why my eyes looked far away even when he was speaking to me. I brushed it off, blaming stress, long hours, exhaustion. He believed me, or maybe he wanted to. Trust can blind us as much as love does, and he had no reason to doubt me. Not yet. But even as he nodded and turned back to his meal, I felt the ground beneath me shift. The secret was no longer just mine to carry. It had begun to show itself in the mirror of his eyes. The second crack came at work. A colleague, sharp and observant, glanced between me and the man whose hands had already gone too far. It was just a look, fleeting, but in that glance was suspicion. The kind of suspicion that lingers even when words are never spoken. I laughed louder that day, tried harder to appear untouched, unshaken. But my laughter sounded hollow in my own ears, and I feared it sounded the same to everyone else. The man himself seemed less careful. His eyes lingered longer in public spaces. His words dipped too close to intimacy even when others were near. He thrived on the risk, on the thrill of a secret half-hidden. But I lived in dread of it, terrified that someone would catch the way his hand brushed too close, the way my breath caught when he leaned toward me. The mirror was cracking, and with every fracture came the risk of exposure. At home, the distance between me and my husband deepened. He still trusted me, still spoke to me with love, but suspicion is a poison that seeps slowly. He didn't ask again, not directly, but I saw it in his eyes sometimes, a flicker of doubt, quickly smothered. The guilt inside me turned that flicker into a flame, until even his silence felt like an accusation. I couldn't stand the way he looked at me with love I no longer felt worthy of. I couldn't stand the way I looked back, knowing the reflection he saw was already cracked. Family gatherings, once warm and familiar, began to feel like stages. I played the role of wife, daughter, sister, smiling and nodding, but inside I was consumed with fear. Did they notice? Could they tell? Did my mother see the exhaustion in my smile, the tension in my shoulders? Every embrace felt like a test, every casual question like a trap. Secrets warp the world until even love feels like suspicion. The whispers began soon after. I don't know where they started. Perhaps in an office hallway, perhaps in the careful tones of a friend who noticed too much. But once whispers begin, they cannot be silenced. I caught fragments, half-heard sentences cut off when I entered the room. I told myself it was paranoia, that no one knew. But the tightening of voices, the shifting of glances told me otherwise. The mirror cracked further the day my husband came home early. I hadn't expected him. Neither had the man who lingered too close to my desk. Nothing happened, nothing unforgivable, but the air was thick with something undeniable. And my husband saw it. He didn't say a word then, but silence has its own language. His eyes were cold that night, his words fewer. His body turned slightly away in bed. He didn't accuse me. He didn't ask. But in his silence, I heard the mirror shatter. Once suspicion enters a home, it does not leave easily. Every glance becomes heavy, every word measured. I tried harder than ever to be the wife he had always known, but the effort itself betrayed me. Love should not have to be performed, and yet there I was, acting, pretending, trying to paste over the cracks in glass that could no longer hold. What once had been private, mine and his alone, was now spilling outward. The world began to see what I had tried to bury. Judgment seeped in, not in words but in looks, in silences, in the subtle change of how people treated me. And with each crack in the mirror, I saw less of myself. I had become unrecognizable even to me. Secrets destroy not just trust but identity. They force you into masks until you no longer know which face is yours. I stared into mirrors and wondered who I was. Wife, betrayer, victim, conspirator. The reflection offered no answers, only fractures. The worst part was knowing the truth would come eventually. Secrets demand exposure. They rot the air until someone coughs it up. And though I clung to silence with desperate hands, I could feel it slipping. The mirror had already cracked. Soon it would break completely,